We've been having conversations about tribunals. Many tribunals in the country. We had the head of the Secretariat of the Tribunals in the judiciary joining us. We've had several other tribunals. Today we want to talk about sports and disputes in sports. Now there's a tribunal called the Sports Disputes Tribunal, and the chairperson is with us in the studio, Senior Counsel John Ohaga. Good morning.
Morning, Eric.
It's good to have you. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, John, you are very many things. You're senior counsel, means you're a lawyer. You're also an arbitrator. You're also very many other things. You're a leader. People who know you say you're friendly. You're a team leader. You're very many things. Now it comes to disputes tribunal. I have not heard you, sports person. So why sports? How do you end up in the sports dispute tribunal? You'd think, well, Kipchoge Keino.
Well, Eric, if you looked carefully, you'd see that I have a sports background.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
I was games captain in school. I played rugby for Mean Machine. When I left uni, I played for Barclays RFC. I played for Kenya Harlequins. I also played for Nondescripts RFC. But to cover it all, I played for Kenya. So sports is part of my DNA. Mm-hmm. And so when the opportunity to participate in resolving sports disputes came, I thought, well, why not blend, or why not use my training as a lawyer, my experience as an arbitrator, as well as a mediator, to contribute to the resolution of sports disputes. Because I think that resolving sports disputes, inculcating governance in sports, is really part of what we need in this country to begin to commercialize and professionalize sports, which will then enable our sports people to fully exploit their talents and to be able to earn a living from sports.
The various tribunals that we have are established by the various pieces of statutes. So, Sports Disputes Tribunal, what legislation establishes it?
That's the Sports Act of 2013. There's a Sports Act of 2013. But the Sports Tribunal also has jurisdiction under the Anti-Doping Act. So we resolve both sports disputes and we also deal with doping violations. So it's a two-faceted tribunal.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is the scope of the cases or the different kind of stuff that you then either adjudicate over, or what are some of the things that come to the desk? Eric and I had a go at it earlier and we said, okay, well, maybe it's a little bit more than, a disputed goal in a game kind of thing. So what are we really looking at here when it comes to the tribunal and the stuff that comes before you?
All right, that's always an interesting question, because when you look at the Sports Act, on the face of it, our jurisdiction is actually quite narrow, because the Sports Act at Section 58 provides that we'll have jurisdiction to deal with disputes relating to selection to national teams, disciplinary matters from federations, resolving disputes from decisions of the sports registrar. And then there's a wider provision that says any sports-related matter in which the parties agree to come to the tribunal and the tribunal agrees to hear. Now, we have then dealt with numerous disputes, election disputes, factions in federations, employment matters, the question of what sports should be registered, because, for instance, that some sports are governed by more than one international federation. So sometimes there's a conflict or a clash as to which sport or which federation should legitimately run a particular sport in the country. We've dealt with the betting disputes because, betting is big in sports.
Yep.
So there's any number. I'm very surprised every day by the nature of disputes that come before the tribunal. No one day is the same. So sometimes disputes relating even to relegation, for instance, of teams from leagues, docking of points or other sanctions imposed. Disputes such as, for instance, you asked about a disputed goal, those should be dealt with by the leagues themselves. Because every sport, every federation should have its own internal dispute resolution mechanism. Otherwise, we would be flooded with disputes. So we encourage every federation, actually the law requires that they should exhaust their internal dispute resolution mechanism before they come to the tribunal. That way, only significant disputes come before the tribunal.
Okay.
Something that you mentioned, you talked about one of the aspirations that this body that you chair has is in helping bring about a situation where the commercialization and the improvement of our sports management can get to a point where we actually benefit as much as we possibly can.
Precisely.
Now, the question I want to ask is, who manages sports in this country?
Well, the Sports Act was set up hopefully to manage sports in this country. And it has various, shall I say, institutions which are supposed to manage sports in this country. But from holistic perspective, sports should be managed by the ministry responsible for sports. And then these various institutions under the Act should support the management of sports. My own view, though, is that the Sports Act is a poor piece of legislation. That's my view. It does not meet or it does not propel the aspiration of sports people in terms of the things that I have mentioned, commercialization, professionalization, and so on. I think the Sports Act needs to be completely overhauled. I don't think it was well thought through. And I don't see that these structures properly support the our aspirations as sports people in the sports environment. For instance, when I speak about the Sports Tribunal, which I chair, I mentioned earlier that the jurisdiction is very narrow. And what that has led to is parties who want to escape the jurisdiction of the tribunal are able to go to a court of law and stall sports matters there. By their very nature, sports matters should be dealt with speedily, quickly, and sensitively, because the psyche of a sports person is one that is geared to competition, is one that is geared to being on the playing field, not resolving things in courtrooms and boardrooms. But when people go to court, they know that the court process is slow. They know that your normal, regular judges are not necessarily always attuned to the aspirations of sports people. And therefore, in that way, they're able to achieve their objectives, which are not always aligned with the objectives of sports people, by activating those mechanisms. So I think that we need to look at the Sports Act again. I think that it needs to be overhauled. It needs to be a much, much more comprehensive piece of legislation. There needs to be a regulator that is well defined and that who has the ability to be able to police every aspect of sports in this country.
Do you think, and maybe, do you think that there is enough knowledge and information or, enough engagement by sports practitioners, whether you're talking about players, whether you're talking about coaches or even regulators of associations, that there is enough engagement with said Sports Act? If there were, the cases that come before the tribunal, for example, does it show that there's enough engagement with the rules that govern sports in the country? And if there were, would there be so many that come to you?
Let me rephrase that. I think that if there was enough engagement, the nature of disputes that came before the tribunal would be ones that would enable us to develop a holistic philosophy and jurisprudence that would propel us further in commercializing sport. With respect to your question about the engagement of whether it is federation officials, governmental officials, unfortunately, my own view, formed over the last 8 years of chairing the Sports Tribunal, is a lot of people in the sports sector are inherently selfish. They're inherently selfish because they enter sports in order to realize their own ambitions, rather than to assist athletes to realize their ambitions. It's about looking at what is the cake and being able to bake that cake so everybody can benefit from it. But if you see the cake as this narrow, small black forest thing and you want it all to yourself, then obviously you're going to have an attitude that seeks to exclude. So, for instance, if you're an official of a sports federation and your interest is in travel, or your interest is in allowances, or your interest is in control, rather than being able to select the best players, rather than being able to create the best environment for sports people to thrive, then if sports people thrive, then we get more people going to watch sports, you get more sponsors willing to engage with sports, and you get a healthier and more vibrant sports environment, a greater profitability. And when you think about sports, there are so many players that can benefit from sports, from the sports person, sports commentators, journalists, agents, lawyers as well, drawing up contracts and so on and so forth. I mean, speaking in my other capacity as a lawyer in the practice of law, I belong to, my firm belongs to a network of lawyers in which we are setting up a sports sector to look at sports globally. And I was amazed at some of the things that the lawyers in more developed jurisdictions are able to do with sports. I mean, just think about, for instance, the sale of Chelsea the other day. What revenue it generates for everybody involved in putting that deal together. Yeah? And when we look at the talent that we have in this country, we can nurture it and we can all benefit from it, from top down.
But isn't that the bane of...
Let me avoid saying bottom up.
Right, sure. Isn't that the bane of the existence that you mentioned that? And maybe, of course, you have an advantage because, I mean, you were in the fraternity playing as a player and then understood some of these things. But then looking at one of the cases that you mentioned, for example, that may come before you, non-selection of a player who probably has skill, has talent, has been proved over time, not selected to a national team, for example, because the position has been sacrificed for maybe coach player whose tune has been danced to by someone else. Define tune and dancing however you wish. And unfortunately, these decisions are time bound. You make a selection of a national team. They're going to a tournament in X T minus 3 months kind of thing. So they need to prepare and know. Somebody comes before the tribunal with this case. What are we looking at in terms of time? Because this is an issue. It doesn't matter. Pick a sport around the country. It is an issue. How do you deal with such cases that are obviously time sensitive?
Well, that's for me as chair of the Sports Tribunal, that's very easy. I will sit until we are able to resolve the case. Whether it requires me to sit to 8 to 9 p.m., we will sit until we can resolve it. I will give you an example. About was it 3, 4, 5 years ago, we had a dispute relating to a swimmer who had not been selected for the team going to Brazil, Rio. And of course it was time bound because, these names have to be sent in ahead, the players have to be entered for their various events and so on and so forth. And it required to be resolved as quickly as possible. As a tribunal, we sat, we sit in panels. I selected a panel. We sat until maybe 9 p.m., had the evidence, looked at the statistics, deliberated. By the following day, we had an answer, and we were able to resolve that dispute. Now, But when you talk about selections for teams, national teams, some are more difficult than others. There are some sports, for instance, where selection, the criteria is time, for instance. If you are Omanyala, we know what your times are.
Yes.
And we know what the qualification standard is. But where it is a team sport is obviously more difficult because you might find a team sport, a coach wants to play a particular system. And even though you're brilliant, he doesn't think that you fit in that system. Now, that becomes even more difficult. But what we haven't appreciated in Kenya from a national team selection perspective, and I've always hoped that a dispute like that would come before the tribunal, is, a national team includes the officials, includes coaches. And so I really watched with sadness when I saw the roller coaster that we were taken through with the selection of coaches for our football team. There has to be a criteria, surely. You can't just pick and choose 3 months here, 2 months here. We'll give you a contract for 2 months, a contract for 3 months. What is the criteria? Because the Act says that there must be a criteria, and every national federation must adopt a criteria. So those, in my view, would be things that would be ripe for the tribunal to resolve, where a coach is selected on the basis of a criteria that is not transparent, he doesn't have the necessary qualifications, or there was a better candidate, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on what comes before us. And sometimes I look at the sporting pages and I think, I wish this would come before us, honestly. Yeah.
You wish to call them. There's another issue that you deal with, and you said, now this is with regards to doping, the anti-doping regulations. It's an international issue. We've seen a number of Kenyan athletes who have been, cited with regards to doping. How do you handle these matters? I mean, it's not a local authority that has singled out an athlete for doping. It's an international authority. And this international authority is aligned to international federations. So how does the local body, yours, deal with this issue?
Well, when we look at doping, we distinguish between national level athletes and international level athletes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there will be some athletes, for instance, or let me take a step back. Every national federation is supposed to have an anti-doping policy within its constitution, first and foremost. Then within Kenya, there is the Anti-Doping Agency of Kenya, which is responsible for policing doping, for educating the sports fraternity about doping, and so on and so forth. Now, you then have to recognize that athletes are international. Their greatest ambition is to be able to participate internationally.
Yep.
Now, where an athlete, for instance, is running a marathon in Chile, for instance, the protocol requires that the athlete will be tested there. Yeah? So in the first instance, the anti-doping authority there would test the athlete. Now, depending on the nature of the athlete, the test results from there would then be transmitted to the athlete's home country. So in that way, then, when ADAC receives those test results, the samples, and once your sample has tested positive, then ADAC brings dispute or brings the violation before the sports tribunal on the basis that this is a Kenyan athlete for whom ADAC has responsibility. Now, there are other more high-profile athletes, for instance, where the athletics integrity unit has responsibility, if we're talking about athletics. But doping is not limited to athletics. It involves every sport. We've had doping relating to bodybuilders, relating to basketballers, football players.
Darts.
Oddly, but yes, possibly. So, as the tribunal, the jurisdiction in relation to national level athletes ends with the tribunal.
Okay.
But where we are dealing with an international level athlete, the tribunal will determine the validity of the violation. Now, if there is an appeal, that appeal then goes to the Court of Arbitration for Sports.
Okay.
Yeah, because that athlete has international recognition. That's trying to put it as simply as possible.
Are we going on to a break?
You can ask the question.
Yes, this issue of management, I'm a dog with a bone on this one here. Yes, ministry, yes, departments within that ministry that deal with it, but then there are individual businesses that also play in this field of management. What role then do they play? If, as you say, the ministry has the preeminent role in managing sports.
What do you mean individual businesses?
For instance, motorsports.
Yes.
All right? It's one of the, in my mind,
Yes.
fairly well managed sport.
Yes,
Okay?
precisely.
And the people who are involved in it are not necessarily the government or the ministry.
Yes.
So they manage it,
Yes.
which means they are sponsors,
Yes.
they have the money, and from where I sit, it appears it's these people who are supposed to manage it who actually get the money
Yes.
to do whatever it is that they do to make sure that the event is what it's supposed to be.
Precisely.
So I have an idea of what the role is as a layperson. Now, how do you balance what the ministry is supposed to do with these other players?
Yeah, but you see, the ministry must set policy.
Yes.
The ministry must have overall superintendence over every sport. Yeah? And then it has to then percolate down to individual sports and the way each individual sport is managed. You've mentioned motorsport, for instance. Let's go back to football because we all understand football.
Yep.
There was the Kenya Premier League Limited, yeah, which was managing the league. That's supposed to be a private company,
Yes.
yeah, managing the league, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to manage it in as profitable a manner as possible. And in the end, there is no better structure than a privately owned, commercially driven enterprise to be able to introduce the efficiencies, the thinking, and so on that is required in order to drive a sport in the same way that a business is driven. Now, some sports have been able to do that better than others. So you mentioned motorsport, for instance, has been able to do that better than most, but also because you look at the investment that you require for motorsport. You know, you have
It's
to.
immense.
It's immense. So look at, for instance, look at horse racing, for instance. You have to at least own a horse
At the very
or a
least.
stable at the very least. Yeah. So
I didn't see that one coming.
So it really is the nature of the sport. It really is the nature of the sport. And at the end of the day, even most clubs aspire to be run on the basis on which a private limited liability company would be run. Because that way then you have a governance structure that ensures that you can market efficiently, harness shareholder value properly, invite investors in, and so on and so forth. All the things that commercialization calls for. At the end of the day, it really is about commercialization.
It's about the money.
About the money, precisely.
That's it. 28 minutes to 9. Let's take a quick break. John Ohaga, Senior Counsel John Ohaga, is the chairperson of the Sports Disputes Tribunal. We're talking about how this tribunal is steering development of sports in Kenya. Justice Thursdays is the day, and this is the conversation that we're having.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
CT Muga, Ndu Oko, Eric Latif. It's Justice Thursdays. Our guest today is Senior Counsel John Ohaga, chairperson of the Sports Disputes Tribunal. We're talking about how this tribunal helps to steer development of sports in the country and the work that they've been doing. Before we went to the break, I hinted at that. So just let's address that question. How does someone lodge an issue with the Sports Dispute Tribunal?
Well, we try to make it as flexible as possible, because we recognize that that issues will be raised both by lawyers on behalf of their clients as well as by lay people, sports persons who cannot afford legal representation and are therefore less able to deal with the technical processes and procedures. So we have only just recently had our rules gazetted by the Chief Justice. So those should now be available. So the reality is that for the last 7 or so years, we have operated without formal rules, which means that it has allowed us to develop in our own way a mechanism by which we recognize. So if you write us a simple letter, we will recognize, we will try and extract what your grievance is. And we will try and identify who the other party should be and invite the other party to come before the tribunal. Then there's, of course, lawyers who are sophisticated enough to frame full proper petitions. So there's a full array of ways in which you can activate the jurisdiction of the tribunal.
But you said that the law requires that every federation must have its own internal dispute resolution mechanisms.
Correct.
So before someone law comes to you, should they exhaust the internal mechanisms?
They should. They properly should. However, we have found that not every federation has proper internal dispute resolution mechanisms. Yeah, either because they don't have the necessary personnel or they haven't taken the steps to put them in place and so on. And see, all this is part of governance. So part of what we try and do is to educate federations as to what governance structures they should put in place. But one of the things we're very hesitant to do is to send away a litigant because they have not exhausted the internal dispute resolution mechanism. If that mechanism is illusory, if it isn't there, then what are you sending him or her back to? Yeah. So we will also investigate that question. And if we are satisfied that there is actually no mechanism, then we will deal with it. Because in the end, we want to be able to give solutions to the problems that sports people come to us with. Yes.
Oh, okay. As you're speaking about this, a case which is very fresh right now in the sports fraternity comes to mind. And I'm just going to read off some headlines. Sex pests in federation killing Kenyan girls' sporting ambitions. Women in Kenya sports fighting rampant sexual harassment and discrimination. Sexual abuse is prevalent in Kenyan basketball. Kenya basketball sex scandal. 2 women allege youth coach interference. Now, the minister for sports, Amina Mohammed, asked that an inquiry into this be carried out late last year. It has kind of fizzled out into nothing, really. So this is a direct example of what you have just said. Those who are seeking justice, as it were, if they've gone to their association, or in this case, the Kenya Basketball Federation, and the reasons as to why they cannot seek that dispute resolution is because it has been alleged that the federation is covering up its people, right?
Yes.
Is this a case? It can't be one, because we're talking about hundreds of young women here.
That's correct.
It cannot be one person who will come to the tribunal and say, can you help me? It would probably come in form of a petition. Is that something that would be accepted of by the tribunal to say, all right, let's have a look, because we're talking about years and years of this alleged abuse. How would you deal with, or who would you say, okay, guys, you can actually come to us to handle this? It's been recognized by the ministry, as you've said. Has there been enough action? In this case, unfortunately, they're still decrying the situation whereby really nothing has been done. What happens in a case like this?
Well, honestly, I wish they would come to us. If they did, we would be able to look through the case, identify the issues. There are also elements there of criminality, and where we identify issues of criminality, we would then recommend that the DCI investigates this further and have those officials prosecuted, because the criminal prosecution is in the purview of the DCI and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. So that belongs in another docket, so to speak. But in terms of the primary issues which are sports related, players, sexual harassment within a federation or a sport, officials condoning this or covering it up and so on. If it did come to the tribunal, certainly it is something that we would look at, especially when you recognize, as you correctly point out, that the federation is not itself going to be able to investigate itself. Its internal mechanism, in that case, is, shall we say, compromised. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, there are many issues we read about in the newspapers relating to sports which don't end up before the tribunal. A part of it is a lack of education in terms of the availability of remedy before the tribunal. A part of it is also fear. Part of it is just naivety. So it's really upon people who suffer in situations like those to be directed to where they might be able to get relief. I'm aware that the CS, of course, did step in that situation.
Yes.
Because we hear about this sex for places in a team sort of things. And it's horrific, but it doesn't come to the tribunal. So we haven't been able to grapple with it. And this is why I say, back to my point about legislation, this is why I say that the Sports Act needs to be overhauled in order to recognize situations like those and in order to provide a forum where it can be dealt with as quickly as possible. Because the reality also, let me point out, is that if a matter like this ends up before your normal criminal court, it might be 4 or 5 years before it's resolved.
Right.
Yeah. This is if the athlete, the lady athlete is 23 or 24. She might be 29 or 30 before it is finally resolved.
Yep.
Compromise her entire career.
Yep.
Yeah. So there needs to be a fast track by which situations like this can be dealt with.
But John, is there no way that the tribunal can reach out to these people? Because I've heard you say several times, you look at the back pages of the papers and you see an issue and you're like, I wish they came out to the tribunal. It's the same thing you're saying. Would it be wrong if you actually reached out and said, we exist, you can come to us? If you see a specific case somewhere in public, in the media.
As I said, it's education. So forums like this, for instance, help us to educate, to sensitize people to the existence of the tribunal. We have other forums, speak at conferences, and so on and so forth. And even though we want to be as proactive as we can be, we mustn't forget that in the end, the tribunal is supposed to be a neutral arbiter. And so there is some difficulty with a neutral arbiter reaching out to a potential complainant and saying, come to us.
Okay.
Because the other party now will read bias. Will say, you reach out to this person or individual, you cannot be be objective, you cannot be impartial. So that's the tension and the balance that we have to achieve.
Let's look at disputes that. Oh, Ndu, I think you had a part 2 to your question.
Well, no,
I can come to mine later.
Okay, because if you say, then of course you cannot invite a complainant to come to you. What would then be the process that you are asking folks who are clearly stuck in this problem? You have talented young women and men across the country who then are held because, number one, they're not offering sexual favors, or if they actually are offering these favors, they still then get the short end of the stick, literally, later. What happens? Or say, okay, we want to go beyond the 4 or 5 years that it's going to take. We want an answer or at least a solution in the interim. How do they go about this? To whom do they go to have something like this maybe brought before your desk?
Well, in this case, perhaps the first stop might be the ministry. Maybe the ministry should think about setting up a desk, which is specifically designated for handling cases like those, and then educating these people on the potential forums available to them, screening them and determining, should this go to the police? Is this DCI related? Should it go to the tribunal? If so, how should the case be framed? And so on and so forth. As a tribunal, for instance, we have a pro bono list of lawyers to whom we reach out to. We have just signed, we're just about to sign a memorandum of understanding with Kituo cha Sheria, so that Kituo cha Sheria can take on sports-related matters. So, for instance, if the ministry through the suggested desk, sent these people to Kituo cha Sheria. Kituo cha Sheria would then be able to identify that a particular matter can come to the tribunal and bring it to the tribunal. And then we would be able to deal with it from there. So I think it's about creating structures. And those structures must be responsive to the challenges that athletes face on a daily basis.
Okay.
Yes.
So my question was very directly related to what is happening currently in the country. We have ministry. We have local football federation affiliated to an international football federation. Then we have the ministry and the local football federation having issues and disputes. And the International Football Federation stepping in and saying, you know, our general constitution says you shall not interfere. Now, is it not possible for the Sports Dispute Tribunal in the country to arbitrate here and see how can we reach out to FIFA, for example, and say, whenever there's such an issue, let us be the ones that first deal with this in terms of bringing the ministry to the table, the local federation to the table, and addressing the matters before they escalate?
Eric, at the beginning of 2020, at the height of the disputes relating to elections of football in Kenya, the tribunal had cancelled the Football Kenya Federation elections 4 times. Yeah. In one of the very, very detailed and well-considered decisions that we put out, one of our recommendations was that FIFA should set up a normalization committee for football. Yeah. That was 2 years ago. That led us to engage with FIFA. FIFA reached out to the tribunal, reached out to the ministry as well. FIFA then invited the CS, Amina Mohammed, the registrar of sports, and myself to visit them in Lausanne, Switzerland. Unfortunately, on the day we were scheduled to travel, COVID was declared a global pandemic, and so we had to cancel our flights. So the point I'm making is that this issue is not unforeseen. It is just that out of the lack of tenable options, the CS had to turn to the Sports Act in order to set up the caretaker committee that she did. And that was really a search for finding a solution to what was clearly bedeviling football in Kenya. I think every stakeholder recognizes that football was in its death throes because of poor governance. Now, a government that is pumping in millions of shillings into a sport like football is not, on the one hand, going to sit and, and be helpless in the face of things like this. Unfortunately, as you correctly recognize, FIFA is
a government.
In many ways more powerful than many governments.
Yep.
Yeah. And FIFA's policies do not allow third-party, they call it third-party interference. And we have to recognize that. Actually, most international federations frown upon third-party interference. It's just that football is more robust. FIFA is more robust about imposing it. But this always leaves national governments in a very difficult situation. Because on the one hand, you have your domestic legislation.
Yep.
You have these people who are running football in your country, benefiting from state resources, probably misusing those state resources if the audit reports are to be believed, taking the national sports down the drain. What are you as a national government to do? And I think this is one of those situations which calls for FIFA to be more sensitive to the needs of national governments in the way that sport is run. Unfortunately, in my view, FIFA is also a political animal. Yeah? The officials of FIFA are voted into office. They rely on votes from
the federation.
From the federation. So they will always lean in favor of the federations. And FIFA itself is not clean. I mean, look at all the scandal that goes back to Sepp Blatter and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So this is a real problem. And there must be some way to find a solution. I can see the conundrum here. But the point I'm making is 2 years ago, we did recommend the formation of a nationalization committee. I wish FIFA had taken that suggestion at that time. we would not be where we are today, because we might still end up with a normalization committee.
So many years down the road, and after our footballers having suffered what they're going through now. We also have an issue with not just football, but management and governance of the other sports federations. Some keep doing well at some point, and then they stop doing well at some point just because of governance. At some point, in fact, CT was reminding us another day, cricket was doing so well in this country. Right now, we're not so sure whether they're doing well at all.
When someone mentions cricket, you are certain they're talking about an insect of sorts.
You hear crickets.
Yeah, you hear cricket.
You hear chirping.
You know, and yet we had seen the potential of cricket. We've seen the potential of hockey. We've seen the potential of volleyball. We've seen the potential of rugby. We keep having these issues about governance. What is the problem, John, from your own perspective?
Governance. Selfish interests.
Weak laws, weak regulations, or individuals?
It's a combination of all. Back to cricket, you mentioned cricket. Again, cricket came to the tribunal 2-3 years ago, I recall very well. The decision of the tribunal was that cricket should hold elections, because at the time, it was a dispute between two factions that were jockeying for control of cricket. We recommended that elections be held. One faction went to court, to the High Court, purportedly on an appeal. Yeah. It took the High Court another 2 years to grapple with that issue and eventually come to actually not even a decision. But the point is that it stalled in the High Court. And this is why I went back to the issue of selfish individuals activating structures where they know that it will delay. So whilst there is delay, there is decay. Because as it's delaying there, who is running after the affairs of cricket? Eventually, again, the CS had to appoint a committee, a caretaker committee, go through a process, revamp the constitution, and so on and so forth. I have to say, unfortunately, they're back again before the tribunal, challenging the elections. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that, but I can tell you it is back before the tribunal. So whatever situation arises, they might end up back in court. Again, another 2-3 years of decay. So we are going to just have this cyclic thing without resolving the issues, without allowing cricket to breathe, without allowing the infusion of the much needed governance structures. And that's because there is that avenue that allows access to a normal court and therefore stalling of the process there. And that needs to be closed, in my view.
Has anything been done, John, to try and amend the Sports Act so that some of these issues that the Act itself acts as a barrier and as a limitation to?
Well, for instance, the Act itself, let me just say, the Act itself does not provide an avenue for appeals to the court. Yeah, but you know, us lawyers are very crafty and clever individuals.
They're very creative.
Very creative. Yes. So where there is no appeal allowed, they will go for something called judicial review, which is another. You're not appealing, but you're saying the tribunal was unreasonable.
Give us a legal opinion.
Or precisely, yes. Or the decision was unconstitutional, or all sorts of things, and that allows that avenue. And once the court issues an order staying a decision or a conservatory order, that spot will be stuck there because it will interfere with the. I'll tell you, for instance, we're stuck with swimming now. Swimming is one of the sports under the Sports Tribunal's docket now. We assisted swimming to formulate a constitution 2-3 years ago. The constitution was approved by FINA, which is the international body. And then some individuals went to court. And they said, the provisions in that constitution are in violation of the Kenya Constitution in relation to the manner in which elections are to be held. And the court issued an order stopping the elections for swimming. For 2 years now, swimming has not been able to hold elections, which means they are pending the decision of the court. So what has happened now is that FINA has effectively banned Kenya because Kenya does not have an elected
Leadership.
federation or leadership for its federation. And these are the things that I mention as ailing sports, as negating the development of sports
in the country. You have your work cut out. You have a lot that you need to do, even in terms of just creating awareness with the passion that you have for sport. We thank you very much for joining us. John, you thought 1 hour is a very long time, right?
I did.
It's up.
It's up.